You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 117. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so glad you've joined me here this week. I am delighted to have you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me. We are talking about a very important topic today. It is the topic of how to delegate to junior lawyers and to students. If you are interested in today's topic, my guess is that you are either a delegating lawyer, you may be the instructing lawyer, and you're looking for some ideas about how you can delegate to junior lawyers and to students, in which case, fabulous, you are in the right place. It may be that you are a student or junior lawyer who is receiving instructions and you are looking for ways, strategies, ideas to better take instructions. Now, regardless of whether you're the assigning lawyer or the student or lawyer who is receiving the assignment, you are absolutely in the right place. This topic, delegation, is one that I have addressed with my coaching clients in individual coaching sessions, talking about how to better delegate, when to delegate, how to do so effectively. I've also been asked to speak at law firms about this topic. I've spoken about it from the perspective of the more senior lawyer, so how to delegate to more junior lawyers. I've also spoken about it from the perspective of the student or more junior lawyer. How do you effectively take instructions from a more senior lawyer? So regardless of where you would situate yourself on the spectrum from student to senior lawyer, you will find something in this podcast episode that you can apply going forward. And it's simply a lens perspective shift. So if you're the senior lawyer, then you will look at it from the perspective of the person delegating. If you are the junior lawyer or the student, you will look at it from the perspective of the person who is receiving instructions. So I will focus more on the delegation aspect of it, but I'll also toggle back and forth to show how having the different perspectives actually helps both parties in this delegation relationship to produce the desired results. So what I've got for you today is I've got 7 tips all together. I'm going to walk through each of those, and you may want to take some notes if that is helpful for you. You can always come back to this podcast episode. The idea here is I'm going to give you what is effectively a formula for delegating going forward. So maybe I'll tell you what the steps are first, and then we can dive into them. The first is identifying the deliverable. The second is setting a timeline. Third is confirming instructions. The fourth is instructing your junior how best to work with you. The fifth is clarifying any questions. The sixth is following up. And the seventh is really a bonus, and that is feedback. So that is the outline of what we're talking about today. I'm going to dive in with step 1. Step 1 is perhaps one of the most important steps. Now, before we dive into that step, I forgot to mention 2 things. Whenever you enter into one of these delegating relationships, I would invite you to do 2 things. Number 1 is to focus on the quality of your instructions. If you are delegating a task, the quality of the work product that you are going to get back will be correlated directly to the quality of instructions that you give. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. The second thing that I would invite you to bear in mind is the seniority and experience level of the person to whom you are delegating, because their level of seniority and experience will impact how you want to provide your instructions. So I'm making the assumption that you are a senior lawyer delegating to a student or junior lawyer. And so that will be the tone, but you might want to think about how things might be different if you're assigning work to a more senior lawyer or a staff member. Perhaps it's your paralegal or your assistant, or maybe you're thinking about delegating in a context that is outside of work. So the first step, as I mentioned, is to identify what the deliverable is. Now, sometimes as the instructing lawyer, you will have a very clear idea of exactly what it is that you want. The more clarity you can provide to the person to whom you are delegating, the better. You might imagine that that person is playing a game of archery, and what they want more, you want this too, but what they want more than anything else is to shoot the arrow into the center of the bullseye. It helps them, it helps you. Now, if you want to set them up for that successful target shot, you need to be able to give them a target to aim for. You need to let them know what the bullseye actually looks like, where it is. So if you are delegating to somebody who is quite junior, who may not have experience in what it is that you're about to delegate, you will need to give clearer instructions than if you're delegating to somebody that you've worked with before. They already know what to expect. They've already got a sense of what the target looks like and where they can find the bullseye. So the first thing that you want to do is be clear about what it is that you are asking for. Now, I know and understand that sometimes as a senior lawyer, you yourself are up against a challenge that you've never seen before. So you may not know specifically, exactly, precisely what the target is, in which case, do your best to describe it. And perhaps that is part of the discussion with the person to whom you delegate, that this is a bit of a moving target, but here's what you think you want to have. Now, the target, the result, the outcome that you're looking for very likely takes shape of some form. Now, if it's a written product, maybe it's a memo that you're looking for. Maybe you want a checklist. Maybe you want a flippable email. You want them to summarize a case finding and you want to be able to forward that on to the client. You want to think about exactly what it is that you would like the lawyer or student to produce for you and to let them know that this is what it looks like. Now, if there is an example of something that has been done well, maybe you're asking them to draft a release and you've got a release that you used recently that's a great example, you might flip them the precedent release and offer that they model it after that. Depending on the nature of your practice, whether you're litigation, whether you're a solicitor, you'll have different precedents. You might offer those precedents to the junior and or let them know where they can find additional precedents. Before I move on, if you are the junior in this relationship, ask the senior lawyer whether they have an example of a work product that was done well that they can share with you, or ask them if they know of another lawyer or another junior or an assistant who can help you track that information down. Now, the next thing you'll want to cover, first, we've already talked about what you're asking for, what form that's going to take, and then you're going to want to know where this task fits in the big picture. As the senior lawyer, one of the things that you probably want to be doing is apprenticing your junior. You want to teach them the bigger picture, and initially what you are doing is asking them to get involved on more discrete tasks. So if you're able to assign the discrete task while explaining where it fits into the bigger picture, what you're doing is you're giving them more data, more information that they can use to make sure that the product that they are going to deliver to you is useful. Now, for the junior, you may also want to be asking where this product fits within the big picture. Now, the next question that you may be asking or that you may want to explain is, what specifically will this be used for? Now, I've made the assumption that what you're asking for is going to be done in writing. It may be that what you're instructing is not done in writing. Maybe you're asking them to file a document at the court. This is something that I used to do as a litigator. Can you take this to the court registry and file it, please, and send me an email to let me know it has been done? Maybe that's the task. But if what you're asking for is something that is a written work product, maybe it's a little bit more complex, hopefully it's a bit more complex than running court documents, then you're going to want to perhaps let them know what the next step is going to be on the file. So for example, if you're asking a student or a lawyer to do some research, it may be that that research is going to be, there's a memo that will be produced, and from that memo, you will produce an opinion letter or you're going to draft a pleading. So you might let them know that that is the intended use. Now, another intended use that often comes up is that flippable email. The idea here is, what do you want to do with this particular work product? Is it something that you want to be able to share with other lawyers at your firm, other members of your organization? Is it something you want to be able to pass on to the client? let them know what it's going to be used for. Now, this will also help with that next question that I have, which is, who is the audience? And here I would invite you to think about who is the immediate audience and who may also be in the audience. I used to be a litigator, and one of the things that we would sometimes write are those Dear Judge letters. So typically this would be a letter going to opposing counsel. Maybe you're asking for documents, and you're writing that letter in such a way that it's really a letter to the judge, because you're asking that opposing counsel for them to do a certain thing, and you know that if they don't do that certain thing, it may require an application to court, in which case that letter becomes an exhibit to an affidavit. You can see where I'm going with this. You want that person to know not only what it is going to be used for immediately, who are they writing to, but also where might this work product end up. And again, this is going beyond the discrete task and helping that junior lawyer or student see the bigger picture. How are you creating a trail, for example, that would lead you to a court application? Now, of course, who the audience is will then influence who or how the product is prepared and delivered. Now, the other thing that I would invite you to share with the student or the lawyer that you're delegating to is where they can get additional information. So it may be that there are a number of lawyers who are staffed on a particular mandate, in which case you might refer them to another junior lawyer. It may be that there is an electronic database that houses all of the relevant pleadings and research memos that have been done to date, the documents, etc. So let them know where they can find materials and who they might go to help them find those materials. So that is step 1 of 7, is to define what it is that you are asking for. Now, the second step in this process is to be clear about the timelines. Now, this is an area where I think sometimes senior lawyers can make assumptions about when the work is going to get done. They may assume that it's clear from the instructions when the work needs to be done, but the person who's receiving the work has no idea. They don't know if this is an immediate task or if this is a task that can wait for 2 weeks. And so I invite you as the instructing lawyer to assign a timeline. Now, it is important when you are giving that timeline to make it clear. You might want to give an actual date, possibly even a time if that is applicable. And you want to give time for errors, because there may be a work product that comes back that simply isn't usable, that you're going to have to fix up. You may need to get an extension. It takes the lawyer, the junior lawyer, or the student longer than anticipated to complete the project. And so you may need, or they may need, an extension. So you want to make sure that you're building a cushion in when they deliver the task. And what I would invite you to think about here too is you managing your own time. So as the delegating lawyer, I would invite you to think about how you're managing your calendar and how helpful it can be for you when you have clear timelines about when you expect deliverables to be returned to you. Now, if you are the junior lawyer or the student and your senior lawyer has not given you a timeline, then I would encourage you to ask for a timeline. That really should be part of your practice because, again, you want to know when something is due. This will also help you manage your time. So you'll be able to juggle the tasks on your plate when you know what the priorities are in terms of timing. Now, going back to senior lawyer, task assigner, you might want to provide an estimate to a junior lawyer about how long you expect a task to take. Now, it may be that you are not entirely clear yourself on how long that will take. And I have heard examples from lawyers, both senior and junior, where the time estimates aren't necessarily accurate. A more senior lawyer might underestimate how long it's going to take to do a task because for them, it probably wouldn't take that long. But for somebody who is just starting out, it might take them quite a bit longer than that initial time estimate. So you can offer a time estimate, but you'll need to be clear about the significance of that estimate. If you only want somebody to spend 5 hours on a particular task, then that is part of the instructions. Please only spend 5 hours, then return to me. That's the budget we have for this particular task on this particular file. Or maybe the instruction is, listen, I think this is going to take you about 5 hours. Come back to me. If you're at 3 hours or if you're at 5 hours and you're not getting things, you're not getting the answer, you're not finding it, it's taking you longer than I thought it would take you, come back to me and we'll renegotiate the timeline. You just want to be clear about the expectations that you're setting for that other lawyer so that it is clear to them what they need to do. Do they have unlimited time to get this done? When is the deadline? And by unlimited, I just mean, do they have a cap on how much work they are budgeted to do on that particular task or not? You want them to be very clear about the time that is expected and perhaps mandated through the client. So that's under that timeline section. We want to give a due date. We may want to give a time estimate. And then finally, you might want to create checkpoints with your junior lawyer. So if the task that you're assigning is a large project, it is going to take them perhaps dozens of hours to complete, then I recommend having check-ins with that lawyer, with that student, so that you can make sure that they are on the right track. So what you might say is, the deadline is a month from today. Let's check in next Tuesday so that I can see how your initial research, what your initial findings are, what we want to do next. So make sure that you're setting in some check-in points so that you don't give that person a month, you don't see them for a month, and when they show up a month later, what they produce is something that does not align at all with that goal that you set, the target that you were hoping that they would hit in the bullseye. Give yourself that opportunity. Give them the opportunity to check in at a week's time to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So that's at your initial delegation meeting. So far we've talked about the deliverable. We've talked about setting timelines. The third is to ask the person that you're assigning the work to confirm their understanding of their instructions. Here, I want you to think about a Starbucks barista. You order a tall 2/3 full Americano, and you ask them to repeat that back to you. It's a tall 2/3 full Americano. Then you know that they are going to produce exactly what it is that you have asked for. So there are a number of ways that you can do this. Now, number one is, if you've given instructions, the assignment is relatively straightforward. This is not something that is too complicated that would require anything to be written down. They may simply confirm back the instructions verbally. If the assignment is more complicated, then what I would recommend is that you ask them to confirm the instructions. You can ask them to confirm them on the spot, but then also ask them to send you a quick email confirming their understanding of the instructions. Now, the reason that you want them to do that is because, number one, when that junior lawyer or student goes back to their office, they're going to sit down and they're going to process everything that you just told them. Now, I know for a number of lawyers, it takes time between the initial receiving of instructions and processing the information and really understanding what is being asked of them. There is time required. And so when you ask them to go back and confirm the instructions in writing, that person, that lawyer, that student will go back to their desk, they'll review their notes from your conversation, and then they will write back to you what they understand the instructions to be. Now, this is a great opportunity for you as the instructing lawyer to see whether or not they have grasped and understood what it is that you are asking for. You can save yourself a lot of trouble and miscommunication if there's clarity at that initial step. Now, another way of doing this that I've seen lawyers do is to write the instructions, to do an instruction memo yourself. Now, instruction memos are excellent. They really are clear. It allows you to have complete control over the narrative of your instructions. There is a downside, however, and the downside there is that it will take you time. It will take you time to craft the perfect memo that sets out your instructions. Now, if you have that time and you're okay with it, then by all means, go ahead and create those instructions, and you can use those in your discussion with the lawyer to whom you instruct the assignment, using that as a support to then have that person go off and execute the work that you've asked for. So I am all in favor of these written instructions. That being said, it can be time consuming, and you need to ask yourself whether or not this is a practice that you want to have ongoing in your particular practice. Now, what you might do is create a few of these instructing memos and have them as precedents that you can then give to the lawyers to whom you delegate. You might say, "Dear lawyer, dear student, we've just had this meeting. What I'd really like you to do is now go to your office and write back a memo or an email confirming your instructions. Here's an example of how I like to see instructions set up." And then you can give them the memo that you'd written on a previous file. So that's a way of dealing with instructions. But the main point here, point number 3, is you want the person who's doing the work to confirm their understanding of the assignment. Now, step 4 is how best to work with you. what can happen is you may not realize that you can be intimidating or you can be difficult to contact. Lawyers who are junior to you, students may feel self-conscious, nervous, reluctant to approach you with questions. They don't want to bother you. And so you will need to instruct them on how it is that they can communicate with you going forward. Here are my recommendations. You obviously have autonomy and you get to do what feels right to you. Number one is I would encourage those to whom you delegate to come back to you with questions. Yes, this may result in questions coming back to you that require time to deal with. But the beauty of that is when you deal with those questions in advance, then you clarify any miscommunications, any doubts, any opportunities for that person to go off track from what it is that you want. You can clarify that at a relatively early stage. Now, it's great if you can have questions in that initial discussion. Again, some lawyers, some students are going to need time to process. And so what you want to do is invite them to come back to you if they have questions that didn't occur to them in that initial meeting. Now, you might also let that junior lawyer or student know that as they are out there in the work itself, whether they're doing research or document review or compiling documents or drafting, that they might come across cases or documents or insights that may not have been clear to you as the instructing lawyer. I mean, you think about research, and the person who spends the most time in the research is the person who's actually doing the research. And so the instructing lawyer might give a particular question. This is the issue that I'm looking to have answered. And once the person to whom that research has been delegated is in the cases, is in the law, is looking at the statutes, they may want to come back and report to the instructing lawyer because that could potentially change the angle of the research. It might change the argument. It might change the opinion. And so letting that person know that they are out in the world and that they are the eyes and ears and that their opinion is important, make that clear to them. Invite them to come back. Let them know that they might find something and that you want to have their input. Now, you'll also want to make it clear about how that person can work with you, how they can reach you. And this, of course, is made a little bit more challenging in the post-pandemic era where some lawyers are working from home, some are in the office. And so you may want to be really specific about email. Maybe email is the best way to reach you. If you're not in the office, they can email, they can call. Maybe you use some sort of Teams or other way of meeting virtually online. So let them know what the best way is for them to reach you. If there are certain days where you're in the office and you would prefer to meet in person, let them know, hey, I'll be in next Tuesday. If you have any questions, come on in and we are going to hash them out. And then finally, again, you want to set expectations. So if you send somebody off on task and you may want to give them some guidance in terms of when to come back to you. Maybe they go off and if you don't find anything for hours, then come back to me. If you start looking into the documents and you realize that there are way more documents than we initially thought, please come back to me and let me know. So give that person instructions about when to come back to you. Now, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that junior lawyers or students who are listening can think about these tips from their perspective. So, of course, if you are the student or the junior lawyer who's receiving the instructions, you might want to ask these questions. Again, going back through the list, the deliverable and what it looks like, timelines that are applicable. You want to confirm your understanding of the instructions. Maybe the lawyer doesn't ask you to do that, but you volunteer to do that. You go ahead and you send an email that confirms your understanding. That way you'll know right away whether or not you've captured exactly what it is that's being asked for. You want to know as the junior lawyer, what is the best way to work with that senior lawyer? How are they available? How can you reach them? And then finally, what you want to do is step 5, clarify any questions that they have and invite follow-up questions. So that's been a theme throughout. You just want to make that really clear. And then step 6 is to follow up if you need to. So you may have a feeling that, you've sent out the assignment, you're getting really close to the due date, you haven't seen the lawyer or the student that you assigned the work to, you kind of have a feeling about it. You might follow up with them and check in with them. And sometimes the student or lawyer might say, yeah, everything's fine, when maybe it's not so fine. So you might want to ask a few follow-up questions if that's the sense you get. It may simply be that they are on track. There are no issues to report, and they are going to be ready to have that deliverable to you by the time that they said. It may also be that the deadline goes by and then you need to do a follow-up to see when it's coming and then decide how you want to proceed from there. So those are the main steps when it comes to delegation. What is the deliverable? What is the timeline? Confirmation of instructions, how best to work with you, clarify any questions and invite follow-up questions, and then finally follow up if you need to. And on this last point, if you're the student or the junior lawyer, you may need, again, to be going back and checking in with your senior lawyer to give them any updates. So you might find you're working on a project and then something else comes in and your timelines get shifted around. You might need to check back in with your instructing lawyer to see if the deadline is negotiable. Now, there is one last step, step 7, and this is a bonus step. This is all about providing feedback. This is where you have a huge opportunity for growth, both as an instructing lawyer, and there is huge opportunity for growth for that student or junior lawyer. The feedback that you give them will help to shape the quality of the work product that comes back in the future. Typically, when you're delegating work, particularly if you're in a law firm or an organization where you work together, what you want is to develop a relationship with that person. You want to be delegating frequently. And the better feedback you give, the more that work product is going to align with what it is that you desire. Now, before you give feedback, I've got a few ideas here for the feedback that you deliver. Is number 1, I would invite you to think about how you want to approach giving feedback. What kind of energy do you want to exude? What kind of presence do you want to have? What I would invite you to adopt is an approach that is firm but flexible. I would also encourage you to hold the person accountable. You want to hold the student or junior lawyer accountable. And you also want to assume competence. So you're looking at this relationship from a long-term perspective. You may see yourself as a mentor. Here, the idea is to provide feedback that is going to foster growth, that will improve your relationship, that will allow that person to really thrive. Now, when it comes to feedback, I'd invite you to think about what feedback looks like for you. And one thing I've learned through my coach training and feedback is that the more specific the feedback, the more actionable it is. So you may be tempted to say, this was a great memo. Thanks so much. That was great work. You're a rock star. And this is beautiful, beautiful feedback. The person receiving the feedback will feel really, really great in the moment. They'll know that they did a good job. But if that's where you leave the feedback, they're not going to know what to do next. They're not going to know what it was that they did well. And there's some risk here, right? If there were components of the work that they did that wasn't necessarily exactly what you wanted, and you've given this blanket approval, then they might continue to do some of those things. And if there are things about that particular piece of work that were excellent and you don't necessarily highlight them, then the student or junior lawyer may not know to do more of that. So here, what I'd invite you to think about is, what specifically did that junior do that was excellent? What stood out to you? What was really effective about the work they did? And maybe give yourself 3 to 5 bullet points of specific aspects of their work that you can share with them. It was concise. You raised an opinion. You organized this really clearly. I like this particular sentence. As much as you can be granular, I would encourage you to do that. And then you get to deliver that feedback in a way that the person receiving it now knows what they did really well. Now, you may also have feedback that is constructive. Maybe there are areas of what didn't go so well, and you want to share that as well. So a nice, easy way of thinking about giving feedback is to focus first on what went well, focus second on what didn't go so well, and focus third on what you'd like to see going forward. So in that second category, you might think about, what are some of the areas? Maybe there was a portion of the written work that seemed a bit looser than the other sections, so you might point that out. And you might say, listen, I'm really helping you refine the writing that you're doing. This was an overall excellent piece of writing, and so please take this as refinement, not criticism. But here, maybe you show them first a really well-written passage, and then you show them the passage that could use some work, and maybe explain to them, what was it specifically about that second passage that you would like to see done differently? And then third, what would be useful going next time? So give them something to look toward. you can help them. You can help the juniors to advance professionally by giving them some clues as to what they can be working toward next. So this was a great memo. You were really clear about the law. You got all the cases. You explained them beautifully. I noticed in this particular section that you included more information than was really necessary. We could probably tease out some of this information. You might even remove some of these cases. We don't really need to have them here. And third step, going forward, what I'd love to see is for you to offer a clearer opinion of what you think the answer is. So that might be an example of how you can go about delivering feedback. And again, I'm speaking off the cuff. These are ways that I'm inviting you to consider using feedback. Your feedback, of course, will be your unique feedback. The language that you use will, of course, be your language. But the idea here is to really use this as an opportunity to help your junior develop and also help you cultivate a relationship where you now can build on your experience working together to create a continually improved work product. Now, a couple other points here. Number one is, if time permits, I would invite you to resist the urge to do the work for the junior. That will sometimes be really tempting. And in some situations, you may have no choice. The timeline is near, and so you need to do the work yourself. That is fine. But what is more effective from a learning perspective is to help that person see where the changes are, how you would like them to amend a particular piece of work. And that will help them anchor that learning. They'll understand better what it is that you are looking for. And then finally, and this is a question I invite you to consider. I don't know if you will do this, but you can always ask them for feedback. You can ask them for feedback about how they found the assignment. You can ask them for feedback about how your instructions were. Because if what you're focused on is delegating and becoming better at delegating, you can ask the junior how they found your delegation skills, because they might be in a position to offer some suggestions that would be helpful for both of you going forward. So these are my tips and tricks for delegating. And I think whether you are the one who's giving the instructions or the one who is receiving these instructions, there's a way of processing these ideas and applying them to you. Again, I'll just go through them one last time. The first is identify the deliverable. The second is to be clear about timelines and provide estimates if appropriate. Make sure you have enough time, by the way, when you're setting these timelines. Third is to ask the person who's receiving the work to confirm their understanding, whether it's verbally or in writing. You want to give instructions about how best to work with you and to communicate with you. You want to offer an opportunity to clarify any questions that they have and invite follow-up questions. You may want to follow up if necessary. And finally, you want to provide feedback. That really would be beyond best practices as far as I'm concerned. I think one of the things that I hear from lawyers across the board is that they would love to have more feedback. So if you are able to integrate providing feedback into the delegation equations that you have with your juniors, then you will be doing them a huge service in terms of helping them to pull themselves up the learning curve, and you will, of course, receive the benefit of work product that aligns more closely with what it is that you're seeking. So, my dear friend, thank you for joining me for today's podcast episode. It has been very, very fun. I hope that you are feeling more confident about delegation and taking instructions. If you have any questions at all, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me. And if you find these podcast episodes or this podcast episode to be helpful, to have an impact in your practice, I'm so glad to hear it. I would also love for you to put a review and a rating wherever it is that you download your podcast. It would mean so much to me. It will help other people just like you find this podcast. And I thank you for that. So thank you again for joining. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.